After 3 weeks traveling through Europe, I returned home at 4:30 a.m. and froze at the gate. My suitcases, family photographs, and my late wife's rocking chair had been thrown outside like garbage. My son-in-law stood on the porch holding a folder and sneered, "You don't live here anymore. The house belongs to us now." My daughter remained behind him, avoiding my eyes. I opened the documents and immediately recognized my forged signature. Instead of arguing, I picked up my wife's photograph, looked at them both, smiled, and said one sentence that made all the color drain from their faces. "Thank you for being here. It truly means the world." Quick question before we begin: what country or city are you watching from? Leave it in the comments below. Every response reminds me why I do this at Dad Family Revenge. Some elements in this story are fictional, added for storytelling and educational value. Any resemblance to actual people or places is coincidental. The message, however, is entirely intentional. The cab driver had the radio on low, some country station out of Charlotte. A song about coming home. I didn't catch the words. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket at exactly 4:30 in the morning, and the feeling that moved through my chest right then was something I still don't have a clean word for. The message was from Olivia. "Dad, don't come home. We need distance from you. Please don't contact us." I read it once. Then I read it again, slower, the way you do when the words don't make sense the first time. But you already know, somewhere deep down, that they make perfect sense. "Sir?" The cab driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "You doing okay back there?" "Fine," I said. "Keep going." I'd been away for 3 weeks. A birthday trip, my 65th something, I'd promised myself after Margaret passed. Portugal, then Spain, then a few quiet days along the southern coast of France. Olivia had hugged me at the door before I left. "Have fun, Dad. You deserve this." Jason had shaken my hand and told me to send pictures. Now I was 4 minutes from home, and my daughter was telling me not to come back. The cab turned onto Merriweather Drive, and that's when I saw it. Every light in the house was on. The front porch, the driveway lanterns, the upstairs windows, all of it blazing at 4:30 in the morning, like the place was hosting a party. And stacked along the front walkway, arranged with an almost careful neatness that made my stomach drop, were my suitcases, my boxes, a garbage bag tied at the top that I recognized as the one I kept in the hall closet, and Margaret's rocking chair, the old oak one she'd had since before Olivia was born, the one she used to sit in on Sunday mornings with her coffee pushed to the edge of the porch steps like it was waiting for the trash pickup. "Sir Mal," the driver said quietly. "This your address?" "Yes," I said. "Pull up to the curb." Jason was standing in the doorway. He had his arms crossed and his jaw set in a way I'd seen him practice in mirrors that look men put on when they want to appear calm, but they're actually terrified. He was wearing a pressed shirt at 4:30 in the morning. He'd planned this down to the collar. Olivia stood just behind him. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her arms were wrapped around herself like she was cold, though the June air was thick and warm. When I stepped out of the cab, she flinched. Actually flinched, like she was afraid of what I might say. That hurt worse than the message. "Martin." Jason stepped forward before I could open my mouth. He held up a folder, thick manila, the kind that comes from a lawyer's office. "We've handled the transfer. The house is in our names now. You signed the paperwork before your trip." My heart didn't race. It did something slower and heavier. It dropped and kept dropping like a stone into very deep water. "Let me see that," I said. He handed it over with the confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own plan. I opened the folder. The signature on the transfer documents was clean and precise, my name, my handwriting down to the slight leftward lean I'd developed in my 50s. But it wasn't mine. I'd been signing my name for 65 years. A man knows his own hand. I closed the folder. Across the street, Carol Whitfield stood frozen at the edge of her driveway in a bathrobe, her morning newspaper tucked under her arm, watching with the stricken expression of someone witnessing an accident they can't stop. "Olivia," my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Look at me." She raised her eyes. They were red. She'd been crying, or hadn't slept, or both. For 1 second, I saw my daughter in there, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides. Then Jason put his hand on her arm, and she looked away. "The locksmith already came," Jason said. "There's a hotel reservation in your name at the Marriott on Tryon. We thought you'd want somewhere comfortable while I asked." He blinked. "While you figure out your next steps." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I walked. Both of them lifted Margaret's rocking chair off the porch and carried it to the trunk of the cab. The driver got out without being asked and helped me fit it in. I turned back to the house one last time. Jason's expression had shifted. The practiced calm was cracking at the edges, something uncertain working its way through. "Do you know," I said quietly, "who actually owns this house?" Jason laughed, a short, sharp sound. "We do, Martin. It's all in the paperwork." I didn't answer him. I got into the cab, and as we pulled away from the curb, I reached into my jacket pocket and found David Coleman's number. David had been my attorney for 25 years. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he hadn't been sleeping either. "I've been waiting for this call," David said. His voice was steady and wide awake. "Tell me where you are." My hands were trembling against the phone, not from fear, but from something colder and more deliberate settling into my chest. "Airport Inn on Billy Graham Parkway," I said. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. "I'll meet you in the morning," David said. "And Martin, don't sign anything. Don't call anyone. Just get some rest." I looked out the cab window at the Charlotte skyline beginning to lighten at the edges, the first gray hint of dawn above the office towers on Uptown. Somewhere behind me, the lights of a house that had held 30 years of my life were still blazing in the dark. Of course, I thought. They'd want people to see. The Airport Inn on Billy Graham Parkway was the kind of place that rented rooms by the week to long-haul truckers and traveling nurses, thin walls, a vending machine outside that hummed all night, carpet the color of old mustard. Room 14 was at the end of the ground floor corridor, and the air conditioner rattled like it had a stone caught in its fan. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my banking app for the first time since I'd left for the trip, before I'd boarded the flight to Lisbon 3 weeks earlier. Jason had suggested I turn off my automatic transaction notifications. "Saves on data roaming charges, Martin. International fees add up fast." It had seemed reasonable. I'd done it without thinking twice. I wished sitting there in that mustard-colored room at 5 in the morning that I had thought twice. The joint checking account. The one Margaret and I had opened together back in 1987, the one I'd kept active out of habit long after she was gone, showed a balance of $214. 3 weeks ago, it had held nearly $40,000. My throat tightened so hard, I had to set the phone down on the bedspread and press both hands flat against my knees to keep them from shaking. $40,000. Gone while I was walking cobblestone streets in Lisbon, eating grilled fish on the coast of the Algarve, believing my daughter was home safe. I picked the phone back up and scrolled through the transaction history. Withdrawal. Withdrawal. Transfer. Withdrawal. Each one clean and authorized because whoever had done this had known exactly which account to touch and exactly how to make it look legitimate. What Jason didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that this account was not where I kept anything that mattered. My primary accounts, my investments, everything. Margaret and I had spent 30 years building carefully and quietly lived somewhere else entirely. Somewhere Jason had never been told about and never thought to ask. But staring at that $200 balance at 5 in the morning, that knowledge didn't make my hands stop shaking. I called Ray Gallagher at 5:15. He picked up before the second ring. "Martin." His voice was rough with sleep, but sharpened immediately, the way it always did when something was wrong. Ray had been my neighbor for 20 years, my friend for longer than that, and he had the particular talent of people who have lost someone they loved. He could hear the weight underneath a person's words without needing them spelled out. "Where are you?" "Airport Inn." Off Billy Graham. A pause. "Then I'll be there in 20 minutes. He made it in 17. When I opened the door, he took one look at my face and said, "Come sit down." Like I was the guest, and this was his room. He pulled the desk chair around and sat across from me while I talked. I told him about the text message, about the house, the boxes, Margaret's rocking chair on the porch steps, about Jason's folder and the signature that wasn't mine, about the bank balance on my phone. Ray listened to all of it without interrupting. His jaw tightened once when I got to the part about Margaret's chair. He pressed his mouth into a flat line and looked at the floor for a moment. "I always thought that boy had cold eyes," he said finally. "Even at the wedding. You remember I told you that." "You told me that," I said. "You said I was being unfair." "I said you were being dramatic." Ray looked up. Was I? I let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in my chest for 3 weeks. "No," I said. "You weren't." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "So what are you going to do?" I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out my wallet, the old brown leather one Margaret had given me for our 25th anniversary, worn soft at the corners, now the stitching fraying on one side. I'd carried it every day since. Inside, behind my driver's license, was a photograph, small, faded at the edges. Margaret in the backyard of our first house, sitting cross-legged on a blanket in the summer sun, laughing at something outside the frame. She looked like herself in that photo, the way she always looked when she didn't know anyone was watching. My eyes burned. I pressed the wallet closed. "There's something they don't know about," I said. "Something Margaret and I built together a long time ago. Something she made sure would still be standing on a day like today." Ray studied me. "How long ago did you two plan for this?" "She was smarter than both of us," I said. "She planned for it before I even knew there was anything to plan for." I stood up and put my jacket back on. Outside the window, the sky over Charlotte was shifting from black to the pale gray of early morning, the first suggestion of light above the tree line on the far side of the parking lot. I need to be at David Coleman's office when it opens," I said. Ray stood too. He put a hand briefly on my shoulder, just for a second, firm and steady, the way men of a certain age express the things they don't say out loud. "You want company?" he asked. "Not this time," I said. "But don't go far." He nodded once. "I'll be right across the street from that house," he said. "If anything changes over there, you'll hear from me before anyone else does." I picked up my overnight bag and the car keys. The front desk had arranged for me. At the door, I stopped and looked back at the room. The rattling air conditioner, the mustard carpet, the thin gray light coming through the curtains. 30 years of work, one Sunday morning, and a balance of $214 in an account that had once held a life. Not the life that matters, I told myself. That one they never touched. I walked out into the morning and drove toward Uptown, David Coleman's office occupied the 12th floor of a glass building on South Tryon Street, with windows that looked out over uptown Charlotte, and on clear mornings, all the way to the tree line beyond Myers Park. I had been coming to this office for 25 years, for contracts for Margaret's estate, for the slow and careful work of building something that would last. The receptionist's desk was empty when I arrived at 7:15. David was already there, standing in the doorway of his office with 2 cups of coffee, wearing the same calm expression he wore in courtrooms and hospital waiting rooms, and every other place where people needed someone to hold steady. He looked at my overnight bag. He looked at my face. "You look like a man who didn't sleep," he said. "I slept fine," I said. "You don't look it." He handed me one of the cups and stepped back to let me in. "Come sit down, Martin." His desk was already covered in folders, thick ones organized and tabbed, the kind of preparation that doesn't happen overnight. He'd known I was coming. He'd known, I realized, for longer than last night. "How much did they get?" he asked, settling into his chair. "The joint account. Close to 40,000, David wrote something on a yellow legal pad. "The others, untouched. They don't know those exist." He nodded slowly, and something in his expression, not relief exactly, but the absence of surprise, told me what I was about to hear had been prepared for a long time. "Martin," he said, "I need to tell you something Margaret asked me not to tell you until a day like today arrived." My chest tightened. I set the coffee cup down carefully on the edge of his desk. "Go ahead." David opened the largest folder and turned it to face me. Across the top in clean black type were the words, "Margaret Legacy Reserve Private Trust Agreement." 4 years ago, David said. About 6 months before Margaret passed, she came to see me alone. She didn't tell you she was coming. She sat in that chair you're sitting in right now, and she spent 2 hours telling me exactly what she wanted to happen to everything you'd both built, not if something happened to you, but if someone tried to take it from you. The air in the room felt different suddenly, thicker. She knew. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "She suspected," David said carefully. "She didn't have proof, but Margaret was—" He paused, choosing the word perceptive in ways that made her uncomfortable sometimes. He tapped the folder. "She asked me to set up a private trust under the North Carolina Uniform Trust Code. We named it the Margaret Legacy Reserve. It holds your primary savings, your bonds, your equity positions in 3 companies, and the commercial property on Albemarle Road." He paused. "And the house on Meriwether Drive." I stared at him. "The house is in the trust. The house," David said, "has never been in your name personally. 11 years ago, when Margaret was first diagnosed, we moved it into Hayes Property, LLC, a limited liability company, with you as the sole member, structured under North Carolina LLC law. The trust holds the LLC." He leaned forward slightly. "Martin, a signature on a personal transfer document means nothing when the asset belongs to a company. Jason Mercer signed your name to a piece of paper that had no legal authority over anything. Every document he filed is void." The words landed one at a time, each one heavier than the last. I pressed my palm flat against the armrest of the chair to keep my hand from trembling. "He never owned it," I said. "He never owned a single square foot of it," David said. "Not for one day." I thought about Jason standing in that doorway at 4:30 in the morning, ulster in hand, pressed shirt that practiced jaw. The confidence of a man who had never once considered that his plan might have been built on nothing. "Margaret set this up," I said. It wasn't a question. "Every clause," David said. "She also insisted on naming First Carolina Trust Company as co-trustee alongside you, which keeps the legal structure clean and protects the assets from any challenge. He opened a second folder, and she left instructions, specific ones, for what to do when this day came. He slid a single page across the desk. At the top, in Margaret's handwriting, I recognized the careful, upright letters she used for anything important were 2 words: activate protocol. My throat closed. I had to look at the ceiling for a moment, at the recessed lighting above David's desk, before I trusted myself to speak. She called it a protocol, I said. She was very organized, David said gently. You know how she was. I did know. God, I knew. The woman who color-coded her recipe cards and kept a maintenance log for every appliance in the house since 1991. Of course, she'd written a protocol. What does it do? I asked. The moment you authorize it, David said. Every recurring payment currently running through your accounts to the Merriweather property stops. Utilities billed to your office. Landscaping contracts. Pool maintenance. Security monitoring. Homeowners insurance. The vehicle financing arrangements. He paused. All of it. Simultaneously. I picked up the pen he'd set beside the page. My hand was still trembling, not from fear, but from something closer to grief and gratitude braided together. So tightly, I couldn't separate them. I thought about Margaret sitting in this same chair 4 years ago, sick and tired, and still thinking 10 steps ahead, still protecting me from things I hadn't seen coming. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. David picked up the phone on his desk and made 2 calls, one to First Carolina Trust Company, one to the accounts manager at the bank. Each call lasted less than 3 minutes. When he set the phone down, he looked at me with the quiet steadiness of a man who had been waiting a long time to do his job. It's done, he said. My phone buzzed on the armrest. A text from Carol Whitfield, the neighbor across from the house. Martin, the landscaping crew, just packed up their truck and left. All of them. Thought you should know. I showed the screen to David. By tomorrow morning, David said, Jason Mercer is going to learn what it costs to steal from a ghost. I looked out the window at the Charlotte skyline, the morning light catching the glass towers of Uptown. Somewhere across town, in a house that had never belonged to him. Jason was probably still asleep. Margaret always was the smarter one, I thought. She always was. Sandra Okafor arrived at David's office at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a leather portfolio and the quiet authority of someone who had spent 20 years finding things people tried very hard to hide. She was the head of fraud investigation at First Carolina Bank, compact, precise, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the kind of steady eyes that didn't waste time on small talk. David had called her that morning after I'd signed the authorization. She'd pulled the account records before noon. Mr. Hayes. She shook my hand and sat down across from me. I'm sorry for what you're dealing with. I'm going to try to make part of it simpler. She opened the portfolio and placed a series of photographs on David's desk. I need you to look at these and tell me if you recognize the man in them. The photos were black and white, printed from security camera footage. The kind of grainy, time-stamped images you see in news reports. They showed the lobby of a notary office on East Trade Street. A man in a dark jacket approached the front desk, signed something, turned slightly toward the camera. I leaned forward and studied his face. That's not me, I said. My voice came out flat and certain. No, Sandra said. It isn't. She tapped the photo with one finger. This man is approximately 2 inches taller than you. He signs with his left hand. And according to the passport records your attorney submitted this morning, you were in southern France on the date this footage was recorded. She paused. Mr. Hayes, someone hired a person to impersonate you at that notary office. The words hit me like a closed fist to the sternum. I gripped the armrest of the chair and breathed through it, that slow, deliberate kind of breathing you learn when the world tilts and you need to stay upright. Jason paid someone to pretend to be me, I said. That's what the evidence suggests, Sandra said. The notary who certified those documents, a man named Pete Dunning, has already been contacted by our legal team. He retained his own attorney this morning, which tells us he knows exactly how serious this is. She closed the portfolio with a clean snap. Mr. Dunning's lawyer reached out within the hour. They want to talk about a cooperation arrangement. David leaned back in his chair. How long will that take? A few days to negotiate terms, Sandra said. But the direction of travel is clear. Mr. Dunning is not going to protect whoever paid him when the alternative is a federal fraud charge. She looked at me directly. Mr. Hayes, what Jason Mercer did hiring someone to impersonate you for the purpose of forging legal documents, that's identity fraud under federal law. Title 18, Section 1028 of the United States Code. It carries up to 15 years. I sat with that number for a moment. 15 years. Outside David's window, Charlotte went about its Tuesday afternoon cars, moving along South Tryon, a delivery truck double-parked below two women eating lunch at a sidewalk table. Ordinary life 20 yards from where mine was coming apart and being reassembled at the same time. He used my face, I said. He paid someone to walk around wearing my face and sign away my house. Yes, Sandra said simply. She didn't soften it, and I was grateful for that. David spoke carefully. Sandra, what do you need from Martin at this stage? His passport, which we already have copies of. His signature samples from the past 5 years, which the bank has on file. She glanced at me. And patience. This moves at the speed of evidence, not emotion. But Mr. Hayes, she held my gaze, the evidence is already very good. After she left, I sat in David's office for a long time. He refilled my coffee without asking. Outside, the afternoon light shifted across the glass towers of uptown gold, going slowly orange. He planned this for months, I said. At least, David said. I thought about Jason shaking my hand at the front door 3 weeks ago. Have a great trip, Martin. You deserve it. Warm smile, firm grip, the whole performance. My chest ached with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, something harder than both, something that had no name I knew. That evening across town, Pete Dunning sat in his car outside his office on Providence Road. His phone lit up, Jason calling for the 4th time. Pete stared at the screen. He thought about the $12,000 in his home safe. He thought about the document his attorney had placed in front of him that afternoon. He pressed the side button. The screen went dark. He put the phone in his pocket and sat in the gathering dusk alone with what he'd done. Ray Gallagher showed up at the airport inn at 7 Wednesday morning with 2 large coffees from the Dunkin' on Woodlawn Road and a fishing rod case over his shoulder. You're not serious, I said. Lake Wiley, he said. 20 minutes. You're going to sit in a boat and not think about any of this for 3 hours, and then you're going to come back and keep fighting. That's the plan. I looked at the coffee he was holding out. I looked at the fishing rod case. I thought about the 12 voicemails and 4 text messages from Olivia sitting unread on my phone. Fine, I said. 20 minutes. We drove out to Lake Wiley in Ray's truck, an old Ford F-150 with 200,000 miles on it and a crack running across the lower corner of the windshield that he'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. The lake was still in the early morning, the surface flat and gray-green. A blue heron standing motionless at the edge of the far bank like it had been carved there. Ray backed the boat trailer down the ramp while I carried the gear. Neither of us said much. That was one of the things I'd always valued about Ray. He understood that sometimes the most useful thing a person could do was simply be present without filling every quiet moment with words. We'd been out on the water about 40 minutes when my phone buzzed. Carol Whitfield. Martin. The landscaping crew just came back for their equipment. Left without doing any work. The yard looks like nobody's been there in a week. I showed Ray the screen. He read it and handed the phone back without comment, but the corner of his mouth tightened. 10 minutes later, another message from Carol. The pool company truck just pulled out. Didn't go in the backyard at all. Then, at 9:43, Olivia called. Her name lit up the screen, and my chest tightened like someone had wrapped a fist around my heart and squeezed. I watched the phone ring 4 times. 5. I set it face down on the seat between us. She's called 8 times since Sunday, I said. Ray was quiet for a moment, watching his line. You going to call her back? Not yet. Okay. He cast again, smooth and practiced. You want to talk about why? I stared out at the far bank where the heron had been. It was gone now. Because I don't know what to say to her yet, I said. Because every time I think about calling her back, I see her standing behind Jason in that doorway, and I stopped. Pressed my lips together hard. She wouldn't look at me, Ray. Her own father, and she couldn't look at me. Ray reeled in slowly. She know the whole thing. Everything Jason planned. I don't know how much she knows, I said. That's part of what I can't figure out. I picked up my own rod and cast without really thinking about it. Margaret used to say that the most dangerous thing in a marriage isn't a bad partner. It's a good person who keeps making small compromises until they don't recognize themselves anymore. Ray was quiet for a long time after that. At 11:15, a different kind of message arrived, this one from a number I didn't recognize with a Mecklenburg County area code. It was a text from the property manager for the security monitoring company. Per our records, the account for the Merriweather Drive property has been closed. Service has been suspended effective today. Please contact our billing department to reinstate. I forwarded it to David without responding. By noon, Carol had sent 3 more updates. The security cameras at the front gate had gone dark. A FedEx delivery had been left on the porch because nobody answered the door. And this one she'd written with what I could tell was a kind of reluctant satisfaction. Jason's silver BMW had a bright orange notice tucked under the windshield wiper, the kind that finance companies send when payments fall behind. Ray, I said. He looked over. You remember when Olivia was about 7 and she wanted a dog, and I told her she had to save up half the money herself. He smiled slowly. You made her do yard work for 6 weeks. She saved $42, I said. She was so proud of that money. She carried it in a little Ziploc bag. I looked down at my hands. I matched it that same afternoon, and we went and got the dog. But I never told her I matched it. I wanted her to believe she'd done it herself. Ray watched me. Why are you thinking about that? Because I spent 30 years doing versions of that, I said. Matching things, quietly. And somewhere along the way, she stopped noticing there was anything to match. My throat burned. I don't blame her for that entirely. I think I made it too easy to not notice. Ray set his rod down across his knees. Martin, you did what good fathers do. You can't spend the rest of your life apologizing for that. I didn't answer right away. Out on the water, a fish broke the surface 20 feet off the bow, a quick silver flash gone before you could be sure you'd seen it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was David. Jason went to his 4th attorney today. The attorney asked to see the property deed. I'm told the meeting ended in under 15 minutes. I read the message twice. Then I put the phone in my shirt pocket and picked up my rod again. "Anything?" Ray asked. "Progress," I said. David had made the appointment with Dr. Nora Finch 2 days earlier, before I'd even known her name. That was the thing about David Coleman. He didn't wait to be told what was coming. He read the shape of a situation and prepared for what it required, the same way a good surgeon lays out every instrument before the first incision. Dr. Finch's office was on Providence Road, 3rd floor of a brick medical building set back from the street, behind a row of mature oaks. The waiting room had the particular quiet of a place where people came to say things they hadn't said anywhere else: soft chairs, natural light, a white noise machine humming outside the door. She came out to meet me herself. Nora Finch was in her mid-50s, trim and composed, with silver-streaked hair pulled back, and the kind of steady, unhurried gaze that made you feel like she was actually listening before you'd said a word. "Mr. Hayes?" She shook my hand. "Come on back." Her office was simple: 2 chairs facing each other at an angle, a desk to one side, framed botanical prints on the walls. She sat across from me and placed a manila folder on her knee. "Your attorney sent me some documents yesterday evening," she said. "I've reviewed them carefully. Before we begin your evaluation, I need to ask you something." She opened the folder and turned it toward me. "Have you ever met a Dr. Gerald Watts?" I looked at the name on the letterhead. "No," I said. "I don't think I've ever heard that name." "Dr. Watts has a valid psychiatric license in North Carolina," she said. "He has been in practice for 19 years. She paused, and something shifted in her expression, not anger exactly, but a controlled, professional version of it. "He has also apparently never met you. And yet he signed this evaluation 3 weeks ago while you were traveling in Europe." She handed me the document. 12 pages, single-spaced. At the top, Psychiatric Evaluation Report, Martin Hayes. I read the first paragraph, then the second. My hands tightened on the paper until my knuckles ached. The report described a man who struggled to remember recent conversations, who showed signs of financial confusion and poor judgment, who had expressed in sessions the report claimed had taken place over 6 weeks an increasing inability to manage the responsibilities of daily life. Every line was precise, clinical, completely fabricated. "He says he evaluated me for 6 weeks," I said. My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher. 6 weekly sessions. He has dates. He has notes. "Yes," Dr. Finch said, "none of which occurred." I set the report down on my knee because my hands had started to tremble, and I didn't want her to see that. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs and breathed slowly through my nose. "What was this for?" I asked. "What does someone do with a report like this?" Dr. Finch leaned forward slightly. "Under North Carolina General Statute 35A, a family member can petition the court to declare an individual incompetent and appoint a guardian to manage their finances and personal affairs. It's called a conservatorship." She held my gaze. "The petition requires supporting documentation, typically a psychiatric evaluation. This report was prepared to serve as that documentation." The full weight of it settled onto my chest like something physical. Not just the house, not just the money. "He was going to have me declared incompetent," I said. "The petition was already drafted," Dr. Finch said quietly. "Your attorney found it in the county court intake records 2 days ago. It hadn't been filed yet. We believe they were waiting until they felt the financial transfers were complete." She paused. "There's one more thing. The nursing home in Concord Care Center already had a unit reserved in your name. The reservation was made 8 months ago." The room felt very still. Outside the window through the oaks on Providence Road, I could see a fragment of blue sky and a single white cloud moving slowly east. 8 months ago. while Olivia was sitting at my Sunday dinner table, passing the bread basket, asking me how my knee was holding up. 8 months ago, Jason had already picked the room. "Mr. Hayes." Dr. Finch's voice was careful and direct. "I want to be very clear about something. I have now spent 2 hours reviewing your history, your financial records, and conducting a preliminary assessment. There is nothing, not one clinical indicator that would support this report's conclusions. You are sharp-oriented and fully capable of managing your own affairs." She paused. "Whoever prepared this document wasn't just committing fraud. They were building a case to erase you." Something broke open in my chest at those words. Not tears, not yet, but the hot pressure behind them that comes when you finally understand the full size of what was aimed at you. I thought about Margaret, about the protocol she'd built, about the folder David had opened on his desk 2 mornings ago. She knew, I thought. She knew something like this was coming, and she spent her last months making sure it couldn't reach me. "What happens now?" I asked. "I complete your independent evaluation," Dr. Finch said. "It will directly contradict every finding in Dr. Watts's report. When your attorney submits it along with evidence that Dr. Watts conducted no actual sessions, the petition becomes worthless." She picked up her pen. "And Dr. Watts will have some very uncomfortable questions to answer from the State Medical Board." She began the evaluation. I answered every question she asked. My voice only broke once when she asked me to describe my wife. Before I go any further, if you're still with me, drop "still here" in the comments right now. I want to know you're watching, because what I'm about to tell you next is the part that changes everything. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements added for storytelling and reflection. If that's not something you'd like to continue with, this is a good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. I was back at the Airport Inn by early afternoon, sitting at the small desk by the window with a legal pad and a pen, writing down everything I remembered about the past 3 weeks in chronological order. David had asked me to do it: dates, conversations, anything. Jason or Olivia had said before I left for the trip. He called it building a timeline. I called it the most painful homework I'd ever been assigned. My phone rang at 3:15. "David, it's done," he said. "I filed the LLC documentation with the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds 40 minutes ago. It's public record now. Anyone who pulls the property history on Meriwether Drive is going to find Hayes Property LLC as the owner of record going back 11 years. I set the pen down. "How long before Jason's people find it?" "They already have." I could hear the quiet satisfaction in David's voice, not gloating, just the clean sound of a man who had prepared something carefully and watched it work. His attorney, whichever one he's found today, would have run a property search the moment he took the case. Standard procedure. The LLC filing was waiting for them. "And Sandra Okafor called me 20 minutes ago," David said. "The attorney contacted her office directly. He wanted to know if there was any document, any at all, that showed Jason Mercer or Olivia Hayes Mercer as having ownership interest in the property." David paused. "There isn't. There never was. Under North Carolina LLC law, a limited liability company's assets cannot be transferred by an individual member's personal signature. The documents Jason filed were void from the moment he created them." I stood up from the desk and walked to the window. The parking lot below was bright in the afternoon sun. A family loading luggage into a minivan 2 rows over a ordinary Thursday in June, carrying on without any awareness of what was unraveling across town. "He built his whole plan on a foundation that didn't exist," I said. "That's exactly right," David said. "And Martin Sandra is opening a formal federal investigation, wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343, because he used electronic communications to execute the scheme. Bank fraud under Section 1344 because he submitted fraudulent LLC documents to secure a loan against the property. A brief pause. She's also referring Dr. Watts's case to the state medical board. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the night Margaret and I had signed those LLC papers. It had been a Tuesday in November 2013, I remembered, because the Panthers had played the night before, and Ray had called me at halftime to complain about the offensive line. Margaret had spread the documents across the kitchen table after dinner, moving the salt and pepper shakers aside to make room. David had driven over himself with a notary to witness the signatures. Margaret had been the one to suggest the LLC in the first place. I'd been resistant. It felt overcomplicated, like building a vault for things that didn't need guarding. She'd looked at me across the kitchen table with that patient, steady expression she reserved for moments when she knew she was right and was waiting for me to catch up. "Martin," she'd said, "we've spent 30 years building something real. I want to make sure it stays real no matter what." I hadn't fully understood what she meant by no matter what. I did now. My phone buzzed. Carol Whitfield. "Martin, something is happening over here. Can you call me?" I called her immediately. She picked up on the first ring, and I could hear in her voice that particular mixture of distress and reluctant fascination that neighbors develop when something dramatic happens directly across the street. "He came home about an hour ago," Carol said, dropping her voice as though Jason might somehow hear her through the phone. "I don't know what happened, but he was Martin. I've watched that man walk into that house 100 times, and he always looks like he owns everything he can see. Not today. He sat in his car in the driveway for 15 minutes before he went inside." "What happened after that?" I asked. "Olivia met him at the door," Carol said. I couldn't hear what they were saying. But Martin, she was asking him something over and over, and he kept shaking his head. She hesitated. She looked scared, not angry. Scared. I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose. My chest ached in that specific way it had been aching since Sunday morning. The particular pain of watching someone you love standing on the wrong side of a door they'd chosen to close. "Thank you, Carol," I said. "Keep your distance from all of it. You don't need to be involved." "I've lived across from your family for 12 years, Martin," she said, and her voice was firm and a little fierce. "I'm already involved." After we hung up, I sat for a long time with the legal pad on my knee, the list of dates and conversations I'd been compiling for David. Outside, the afternoon light was shifting toward evening, the shadows of the cars in the parking lot, stretching long and thin across the asphalt. I thought about Olivia standing at that door, asking Jason something over and over, him shaking his head. What is she asking him, I wondered? And is she starting to understand that she doesn't like the answers? I didn't know yet. But I wrote the question down at the bottom of the legal pad anyway, because David had told me to write down everything that felt important. And that felt important. That evening in the kitchen of the house on Merriweather Drive, Olivia opened a drawer in her father's old desk looking for a pen. She found one pushed beneath an old insurance document and a pocket calendar from 2019. She also found something else, a folded piece of paper she didn't recognize caught between two old paperback books like it had slipped there and been forgotten. She pulled it out, unfolded it, read the header at the top. Her hand went very still. The paper was a printed email. Olivia stood at her father's old desk and read it once quickly, the way you read something when you're hoping the second pass will make it mean something different. It didn't. The email was from Jason's work account, sent to an address at Concord Care Center in Concord, North Carolina. The subject line read, Inquiry Non-Voluntary Admission Process and Monthly Fee Structure. The date in the header was 8 months ago, October, the same month she and Jason had spent a weekend in Asheville celebrating their anniversary. She remembered that weekend. She remembered Jason ordering the expensive bourbon at the bar and telling her everything was going to be fine. She read the body of the email. Jason had written in the careful, neutral language he used for business correspondence, the same tone he used when he was negotiating something and didn't want to show his hand. He asked about the admission process for a family member who may not initially be receptive to the transition. He asked about memory care units specifically. He asked what documentation would be required from a supervising physician. May not initially be receptive to the transition. Olivia read that sentence 4 times. Her legs felt strange, not quite steady, like the floor had shifted slightly beneath her feet without making a sound. She was still standing there when she heard Jason's key in the front door. She folded the paper quickly and pushed it into the pocket of her cardigan. By the time Jason came into the hallway, she was crouched beside the desk, pretending to sort through a box of old files. Hey. His voice was tight. He'd been tight for 3 days now, a controlled, wire-stretched tension she'd learned to read after 6 years of marriage. What are you doing in here? Cleaning out, she said. She didn't look up. I found a box of Dad's old insurance stuff. I wasn't sure what to keep. Jason leaned in the doorway. She could feel him watching her in that way he had, assessing, calculating, deciding whether something required his attention. Leave it, he said. We'll deal with it later. Okay, she said. He went upstairs. She stayed crouched beside the box until she heard the bedroom door close. Then she sat down on the floor of her father's old study, her back against the desk, the printed email in her hand, and pressed her free hand flat against her sternum, because her heart was beating so hard it frightened her. May not initially be receptive. She thought about her father's face on Sunday morning. The way he'd looked at her when he stepped out of that cab, not with anger, not with accusation, but with something much quieter and much harder to bear. He'd looked at her the way you look at something you're trying to memorize before it's gone. Her eyes burned. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth to keep the sound in. 8 months ago, while she was sitting across from her father at Sunday dinners, passing the bread basket, letting him pay for everything. Telling herself it was fine, telling herself. Jason was right, that her father was getting older, and they were just being practical. Jason had already written the email, already picked the facility, already used the word transition in a business letter about her father's life. She heard Jason moving around upstairs, the sound of the bathroom faucet, the television coming on. Olivia stood up. She put the email back in her pocket. She walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists, the way her mother had taught her to do when she was overwhelmed. Cold water. Livy, it brings you back to yourself, and looked out the window at the backyard. The pool was green at the edges now. 3 days without the maintenance service. She thought about calling her father. She thought about it for a long time, standing at that sink with the water running cold over her pulse points, her mother's voice in her head. Then she thought about the laptop Jason had left open on the bedroom desk that morning. The email account still logged in. She turned off the faucet, dried her hands, walked slowly upstairs. Jason was asleep on top of the covers, the television murmuring. The laptop sat open on the desk exactly where she'd seen it. She looked at Jason, looked at the laptop. She sat down at the desk, pulled the keyboard toward her, typed one word into the search bar. Martin. Hit enter. Waited. Looked at the results. The email at the top of the list had a subject line that made her stomach drop straight through the floor. Sandra Okafor's office at First Carolina Bank was on the second floor, a windowless room with a conference table, a whiteboard covered in case numbers, and the particular fluorescent stillness of a place where difficult conversations happened every day, and the furniture had learned not to react. Pete Dunning arrived at 9 in the morning, with his attorney, a compact, quietly efficient man named Gerald Nash, who had spent 30 years doing exactly this kind of work, sitting beside people who had made serious mistakes and helping them navigate the distance between where they were and where they needed to be. I wasn't there. Sandra called me afterward and walked me through it, and I listened from the plastic chair beside the window in my motel room, while Ray sat across from me eating a gas station sandwich and pretending not to listen. Pete had signed the cooperation agreement at 9:22. Gerald Nash had spent 3 days negotiating the terms: 18 months probation, $45,000 in restitution, full cooperation with the federal investigation in exchange for the government's agreement not to seek prison time. Pete had agreed to every condition without pushing back on a single one. He talked for 2 hours, Sandra told me. Everything. The cash payment, $12,000 delivered in 2 installments, both in person. The name of the man Jason hired to impersonate you, Derek Sims, 41 years old, lives in Gastonia. He told us where Jason had gotten your ID photo, how many times they rehearsed the signature, what time of day they chose for the appointment, to avoid the notary office's busiest period. I pressed the phone against my ear and stared at the water stain on the ceiling above my bed. He rehearsed it, I said. Jason had someone practice my signature. Multiple times, according to Mr. Dunning. Sandra's voice was professionally level, but I could hear something underneath it, a controlled anger that she kept carefully out of the way of her work. Mr. Hayes, I want you to understand what we have at this point. We have camera footage. We have passport records placing you out of the country. We have a cooperating witness who was present for the planning and execution. We have financial records showing 2 cash withdrawals from Jason Mercer's personal account, matching the payment amounts Pete Dunning described. She paused. What we are waiting for is one additional piece of evidence. Something that demonstrates this was not impulsive, that it was planned deliberately over an extended period of time. How long before you have enough for an arrest warrant? I asked. Days, she said, not weeks. After I hung up, Ray balled up his sandwich wrapper and tossed it accurately into the trash can by the door. Pete talked, he said. It wasn't a question. Everything, I said. Ray was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck was backing up in the parking lot, the warning beep steady and mechanical. You feel anything about that? He asked. Pete being the one who breaks it open, I thought about it honestly. Pete made a bad choice for money, I said. Jason made a bad choice for everything. There's a difference. I set the phone on the bedside table. I hope Pete uses the next 18 months well. Ray studied me with the expression he wore when he thought I was being more generous than the situation required, but had decided not to say so. We drove out to Lake Wiley again that afternoon, Ray's idea same as Wednesday. The water was calm, the sky a flat, heavy blue, the way it gets in Carolina June before the afternoon storms roll in from the west. I was thinking about Olivia. I'd been thinking about her all morning, moving in and out of the thought the way you move around a bruise, aware of it, constantly touching it, accidentally, pulling back from the pain. She called again this morning, I told Ray, while you were getting coffee. You pick up, no. Ray cast his line. Let it settle. What do you think she wants? I don't know, I said. I think that's what scares me. I don't know anymore what she wants or what she knows or how much of this she understood before it started. I looked out at the far bank at the tree line going dark green in the heavy air. Margaret used to say that the most dangerous thing in a marriage isn't a bad partner. It's a good person who keeps making small compromises until they can't see the line anymore. Ray reeled in slowly. You think Olivia crossed a line she didn't see? I think she stood at a line and let Jason tell her it wasn't there, I said. My throat tightened around the words. And I think some part of her believed him, because it was easier than the alternative. Ray didn't answer right away. A great blue heron landed at the edge of the far bank, folding itself into stillness, with the particular grace of a creature that had learned patience as a survival skill. She's going to have to figure out who she is without him telling her, Ray said finally. That's going to take time. I know, I said. My phone buzzed on the seat between us. A message from David. Sandra called. She knows what the last piece of evidence is. And Martin, I think it's going to come from inside that house. I read the message twice. Then I put the phone back on the seat and picked up my rod and looked out at the water. The heron was still there, motionless at the bank's edge, waiting with the absolute certainty of a creature that knew exactly what it was waiting for. I understood that feeling. Jason fell asleep before 10. Olivia lay beside him in the dark for 20 minutes, listening to his breathing even out and slow. And then she got up quietly and walked down the hall. She hadn't been in her mother's room since the funeral, 4 years. She'd walked past the door 1,000 times. She'd even reached for the handle once about 6 months after Margaret passed, and then pulled her hand back and kept walking. Some rooms hold the shape of a person long after they're gone, and part of Olivia had been afraid that opening that door would somehow prove the shape wasn't there anymore. She opened it now. The room smelled like her mother, faint, almost gone. The last trace of the perfume Margaret had worn for 30 years caught somewhere in the curtains or the carpet. Olivia stood in the doorway with her hand on the light switch and breathed it in and felt something crack open behind her sternum that had been sealed shut for 4 years. She turned the lamp on low. The room was mostly as her mother had left it. Olivia had asked Jason once about redecorating, and he'd agreed immediately. Good idea, we could use the space, and the casualness of his agreement had bothered her in a way she hadn't been able to name at the time. She understood it now. He'd wanted the room emptied. He'd wanted everything in this house to become theirs. She went to the tall wardrobe in the corner. On the top shelf, pushed to the back behind a stack of folded blankets, was a small wooden box. Dark walnut, about the size of a shoebox, with a simple brass clasp. Olivia had known it was there since she was a child. Her mother had never hidden it exactly, but she'd never opened it when anyone else was in the room. Olivia lifted it down with both hands. It was heavier than she remembered. She sat on the edge of her mother's bed and opened the clasp. Inside were letters. 20, maybe more, written on Margaret's personal stationery cream paper, her mother's careful, upright handwriting filling every page. Some were addressed to people Olivia didn't recognize. One was addressed to David Coleman, sealed with a wax stamp. And near the bottom, in an envelope that had been handled enough times to go soft at the corners, was one with a single word on the front. Livy. Olivia's childhood nickname. The one only her mother had used. Her hands were trembling so badly she had trouble getting the envelope open. The letter was 4 pages long. She read it slowly, sitting on her mother's bed in the low lamplight, and with every page the trembling in her hands moved inward until it reached somewhere she didn't have a name for. Margaret had written about the early years, the ones Olivia barely remembered. The apartment with the broken heating, Martin working double shifts at the yard, coming home after midnight, with sawdust on his clothes, and eating dinner cold at the kitchen table so he wouldn't wake her. The year Olivia was 12 when the business nearly failed, and Martin had sold his grandfather's watch without telling anyone to make payroll for his workers. Margaret wrote about the Corvette, the 1967 burgundy one Martin had spent 3 years restoring in the garage on weekends. The one Olivia had grown up watching him work on with the radio playing old Merle Haggard records. He'd sold it 2 weeks after Olivia's college acceptance letter arrived, without mentioning it to anyone. Olivia had noticed the garage was emptier that summer. She'd never asked why. She pressed the back of her hand hard against her mouth. Margaret wrote about the cancer. About the morning the doctor had said stage 3, and Martin had held her hand in the consultation room and not said a single word until they were in the parking garage, and then he'd sat in the driver's seat and put his face in his hands, and she'd heard him make a sound she'd never heard from him before or since. She wrote about the medical bills, about the commercial building on Albemarle Road that Martin had quietly remortgaged to cover the treatments he never mentioned to Olivia, because he'd told Margaret she's in her last year of school and she doesn't need this on her mind. The last paragraph was short. Your father is not a man who knows how to ask for what he needs, Livy. He only knows how to give. I'm afraid one day you'll mistake that for weakness. I need you to know it was never weakness. It was the bravest thing I ever watched anyone do every single day for 30 years. Please don't let him carry all of it alone. Olivia read that paragraph 3 times. Then she folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and pressed it against her chest with both hands. She cried for a long time. Not the quiet kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and long-held, the kind that shakes your shoulders and makes your throat ache the next morning. She cried until she had nothing left, and then she sat in the lamplight in her mother's room, with the letter against her chest, and the smell of old perfume in the air. At 2:47 in the morning, she picked up her phone. She looked at her father's number for a long time. Then she set the phone down, stood up, and walked back down the hall to where Jason's laptop was still open on the bedroom desk. She'd almost forgotten about the email. Almost. The email, at the top of the search results, had been sent to an address Olivia didn't recognize, Graham Ellis, ellisfamilylaw.com, with a subject line that read, She stared at it for 3 full seconds before she opened it. Behind her, Jason was still asleep. She could hear his breathing slow, regular, undisturbed. The bedroom was dark except for the laptop screen, and the light from it felt cold on her face. She opened the email. It was written in the same neutral, business-like tone as the nursing home inquiry, the voice Jason used when he was managing something. The email was addressed to Graham Ellis, who, based on the firm name, was a family law attorney. The date at the top was 3 weeks after the Sunday morning they had changed the locks. 3 weeks after, while her father was sleeping in a motel room off Billy Graham Parkway. Jason had written that he was exploring his options regarding the dissolution of the current marriage and the equitable distribution of recently acquired assets. He described the assets in brief clinical terms: the property on Merriweather Drive, the investment accounts he believed were now accessible, the vehicles. He used the phrase recently acquired 4 times. Olivia read to the bottom of the email. There was a paragraph near the end that she had to read twice before her brain would process it. My wife was necessary to gain access to the situation. Going forward, she will not be a significant factor in the asset structure. I'd like to discuss the most straightforward path to dissolution that minimizes her claim on the primary holdings. She will not be a significant factor. Olivia sat absolutely still at the desk. The laptop screen blurred. She blinked hard, and her vision cleared, and the words were still there. Necessary to gain access. She pressed her hand flat against her collarbone. Her heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her throat. 4 years of marriage. 6 years together. She had stood in the doorway of her father's house on a Sunday morning and watched him load his dead wife's rocking chair into a taxi, and she had done it because Jason had told her it was the right thing, the practical thing, the thing that needed to happen. She had done it because she loved him, because she believed him, because somewhere in the past few years she had gotten so turned around inside that she'd confused his certainty for truth, necessary to gain access. She pushed back from the desk and walked to the bathroom, stood over the sink with the cold water running and her hands braced on the porcelain, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen from crying in her mother's room. Her hair was loose and tangled. She looked like someone who had been through something, and she realized. She just hadn't understood until this moment exactly what that something was. She turned the water off, walked back to the bedroom, looked at Jason sleeping on top of the covers, one arm thrown across her side of the bed in the space she'd left behind. She felt something go very quiet inside her. Not the numb kind of quiet, the clear kind. The kind that comes after a storm when the air is washed clean and you can suddenly see all the way to the tree line. She picked up her phone, walked out of the bedroom, pulled the door closed behind her. In the hallway, she sat down on the floor, with her back against the wall. The same wall where her father had hung a row of family photographs, years ago, the hooks still visible in the drywall, even though Jason had taken the pictures down last month. She looked at those empty hooks for a moment. Then she dialed David Coleman. It rang 4 times. She was afraid it would go to voicemail and she would lose her nerve, but on the 5th ring, he picked up. Olivia. His voice was alert, not surprised, as though he'd been expecting this call at some point and had simply been waiting to see when it would come. Mr. Coleman. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, rough at the edges from crying, but steady at the center. I need to talk to you. I found something on Jason's laptop and She stopped, pressed her lips together. I think I've done something very wrong. I think I've been doing something very wrong for a long time, and I didn't. Her voice cracked, then finally splitting open on the last few words. I didn't see it clearly until tonight. David was quiet for just a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful and even. Are you somewhere safe right now? I'm in the hallway, she said. He's asleep. All right, David said. I need you to listen to me carefully. Don't wake him. Don't tell him you called. And in the morning before he's up, I need you to get in your car and come to my office. A pause. Can you do that? Yes, she said. Good. Another pause. Then more quiet. Olivia, it took courage to make this call. She looked at the empty hooks on the wall where her father's photographs had hung. Her eyes burned all over again, sharp and immediate, and she pressed the back of her wrist against them. No, it didn't, she said. It just took long enough. She left the house at 6:40 in the morning before Jason was awake. She took nothing except her purse, her phone, and Jason's laptop, which she unplugged from the charger with hands that had finally stopped shaking and carried under her arm like something she was afraid to drop. The drive to South Tryon took 18 minutes. She parked in the deck attached to David's building and sat in the car for a moment, with the engine running, the laptop on the passenger seat beside her. The early morning Charlotte skyline pale and quiet through the windshield. Then she got out and went upstairs. David Coleman was already at his desk when the receptionist let her in his jacket on a yellow legal pad. Open in front of him, 2 cups of coffee, waiting on the small table by the window. He stood when she came in. He didn't say anything immediately, he just looked at her the way people look when they've been expecting someone, and are relieved to see them arrive. "Sit down, Olivia," he said. "Take your time." She sat. She placed the laptop on the table between them. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. He pushed toward her and held it without drinking the warmth of it steady against her palms. "I need to tell you everything," she said. "And I need you to know that I'm not—" She stopped, started again. "I'm not here to make excuses. I knew things I shouldn't have let happen. I want you to understand that I understand that." David picked up his pen. "All right," he said. "Start from the beginning." She talked for nearly an hour. She told him about the conversations Jason had with her in the months before Martin's trip, the careful, incremental campaign he'd run on her, the way he'd introduced each idea so gradually that by the time it arrived fully formed, she'd already been half persuaded. He'd started with small things. "Your dad calls too much Liv. He needs to learn to give us space. Then bigger ones. He's getting older. He can't manage everything he thinks he can. We need to start thinking practically." And finally delivered one evening over dinner like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "There's a way to handle this that protects everyone, including him." She told David about the bank account, that she'd known Jason was making transfers from the joint account, that she'd told herself it was a temporary measure, that Martin would understand once they explained. She told him about the notary documents that Jason had shown them to her, and told her Martin had signed them before the trip, that she'd had a moment of doubt, that she'd pushed away because pushing it away was easier. David wrote without interrupting. When she finished, he set his pen down and looked at her directly. "Olivia," he said, "I need to be straightforward with you. What you've described makes you a potential accessory to several federal offenses. I'm not telling you that to frighten you. I'm telling you because you need to understand the position you're in before we go any further." He paused. "The U.S. Attorney's Office has agreed to a non-prosecution agreement in exchange for full cooperation and complete financial restitution. That offer is on the table right now. It will not stay on the table indefinitely, and it disappears entirely the moment you withhold anything." Olivia's chest was tight, but her voice held. "I'm not withholding anything," she said. "Tell me what I need to do." David called Sandra Okafor. She arrived 20 minutes later, took the laptop, and sat across from Olivia for another 40 minutes, asking questions in the quiet, methodical way she had, not unkind, not aggressive, just thorough. Olivia answered every question. When Sandra asked about the notary documents, Olivia described the exact moment Jason had shown them to her, the kitchen table a Tuesday evening. Jason spreading the papers out with the confidence of a man presenting a solution rather than a crime. When Sandra left with the laptop, the room felt emptier and also somehow lighter. David refilled her coffee without asking. He sat back down across from her and looked at her for a moment before he spoke. "Your mother came to this office alone once," he said. "About 5 years ago. She sat in that chair you're sitting in now." He paused. "She was worried about you. Not about your father, about you. She said she was afraid that someday you'd find yourself in a situation where the easiest path and the right path had diverged so far apart that you wouldn't be able to see the right one anymore." He held her gaze. "She'd be glad you made the call this morning." Olivia pressed her fingers against her eyes. They burned, but she was too wrung out to cry again. "I should have made it 4 days ago," she said. "Yes," David said without softening it. "But you're here now." He picked up the phone on his desk, dialed, waited. "Martin," he said. "Your daughter just walked into my office." A pause, listening. Then David looked at Olivia across the desk, and something in his expression shifted just slightly, just enough. "She's all right," he said into the phone. But there's one more thing you need to hear. Can you come in tomorrow morning? He set the phone down, looked at Olivia. He asked if you were okay, David said. That was the first thing he asked. Olivia looked down at her hands wrapped around the coffee cup. Her throat closed so tightly that for a moment she couldn't speak at all. Of course it was, she finally managed. Of course that was the first thing. Before I tell you what Margaret left behind, drop 13 in the comments, so I know you're still here. This is the part of the story I've been thinking about every single day since it happened. The part that broke me open completely. A gentle note, portions of this story contain fictional elements added for educational and storytelling purposes. If that changes things for you, this is a natural place to stop, but I hope you'll stay for what comes next. David's office was quiet when I arrived Sunday morning. The receptionist wasn't in. It was the weekend, and David had left the elevator lobby door unlocked for me. I took the stairs instead. 12 floors. I needed the time. He was at his desk when I pushed the door open, jacket-off sleeves rolled to the elbows, a sealed manila envelope on the desk in front of him that he'd clearly been sitting with for some time before I arrived. "Coffee's on the table," he said. I poured a cup and sat down across from him. I looked at the envelope. It was old, the paper had gone slightly yellow at the edges, and it had been sealed with clear tape over the flap, in addition to the adhesive, the way someone does when they want to make absolutely certain it stays closed until the right moment. Written on the front in Margaret's handwriting were 2 words. David Coleman. She brought this to me herself, David said, 4 years ago, about 3 months before she passed. He touched the corner of the envelope with one finger. She asked me to keep it until a day came when you walked into this office the way you walked in last Monday. She was very specific about that. My throat was already tight. What's in it? Instead of answering, David opened his desk drawer and placed a small object on the desk beside the envelope. A voice recorder, small black plastic casing gone slightly dull with age. The kind you could buy at any office supply store for $30. I put a fresh battery in last week, David said quietly. I had a feeling we were getting close. He looked at me. Martin, before I play this, I need to explain something. Under North Carolina Law Section 15A, 287, a person can legally record a conversation they are personally participating in without notifying the other party. Margaret was present for this conversation. She recorded it herself. That makes it entirely legal, and it makes it admissible as corroborating evidence alongside everything else Sandra has built. He paused. It is not the foundation of the case. The case is already built. This is Chio. He searched for the word confirmation. I reached out and picked up the recorder. It was lighter than I expected. I turned it over in my hands. Margaret had written a date on a small piece of tape on the back, her handwriting careful and upright. The date was from 4 years ago. A Tuesday in October, 5 months before she died. She didn't tell me she was doing this, I said. No, David said. She told me she was afraid that if she told you, you'd try to confront Jason directly and it would make things worse. She wanted to wait until she had something concrete. And then... He stopped. And then she ran out of time, I said. Yes. I set the recorder down on the desk. I looked at it for a moment. Then I pressed play. There was a brief hiss of static. Then the sound of a room background noise, the faint hum of a kitchen appliance. The particular acoustic quality of a space I recognized immediately without being able to say why. Then Margaret's voice. I wasn't prepared for it. I don't know why I thought I would be. I'd been told what was on the recording. I'd known it was coming. But the sound of her voice in that quiet office on a Sunday morning hit me somewhere so deep and so specific that my hand jerked on the armrest, and I had to grip it to stay still. She sounded like herself. That was the thing that undid me. Not like a sick woman, not like someone saying goodbye. She sounded like Margaret on any ordinary afternoon, calm and clear, and slightly careful in the way she got when she was managing something she found difficult. She was talking to Jason. I couldn't make out everything at first. The recording had some distance in it, as though she'd set the recorder down somewhere nearby rather than held it. But the words became clearer as the conversation settled. Jason's voice came through lower, more controlled. He was in the middle of a sentence when the recording picked up clearly. "Not trying to be disrespectful, Margaret. I'm just being practical. Martin's getting older. The way he manages things now isn't sustainable long term." Margaret's voice measured. "Jason Martin is 61 years old, and he runs 3 businesses without assistance. What exactly are you concerned about?" A pause. Then Jason, choosing his words with the care of someone who believed he was being persuasive. "I just think Olivia would be better off, both of them would be better off when Martin isn't the one making all the financial decisions anymore. Someone younger could manage things more efficiently." Another pause. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had changed, still controlled, but with something underneath it. Something I recognized as the tone she used when she had already decided something and was simply cataloging information for later. "I see," she said. "Thank you for being honest with me, Jason." The recording continued for another minute, small talk, the sound of chairs, a door. Then it ended. The office was very quiet. I realized my face was wet. I hadn't noticed it happening. I pressed the heel of my hand against my cheek and stared at the recorder on the desk, small, black, ordinary, and thought about my wife sitting alone in some room of our house with that thing hidden nearby, listening to her son-in-law tell her that her husband's usefulness had an expiration date. She hadn't told me. She'd protected me from knowing the same way I'd protected her from knowing about the remortgage. The same way we'd spent 35 years quietly absorbing things so the other one wouldn't have to. "She knew," I said. My voice was wrecked. "She knew exactly what he was." "Yes," David said. "And she built the whole thing, the LLC, the trust, the protocol. She built all of it knowing that one day he was going to try. She built it," David said carefully, "because she loved you, and because she was Margaret." I picked up the recorder again, held it in both hands. It was warm from sitting in the patch of sunlight coming through the window. You never stopped, I thought. Even after. You never stopped. My phone buzzed on the armrest. Carol Whitfield. Martin. "There are 2 police cars outside the house. Just thought you should know." I read the message. Set the phone down. Looked at David. "It's time," he said. "I didn't go to the house. Ray had offered to drive me over." "You don't have to go in, Martin. You could just park down the street," and I'd told him no. I didn't need to watch. I didn't want to watch. Whatever was happening on Merriweather Drive that Sunday morning was Sandra Okafor's work and the law's work, and the most useful thing I could do was stay out of the way and let both of them do their jobs. We drove out to Lake Wiley instead. Same ramp, same boat, same stretch of water. The sky was overcast, the kind of flat gray that settles over the Carolina Piedmont in early summer, before the heat builds back up and the lake was dark and still beneath it. Ray had the truck radio on low while we loaded the gear. A Charlotte news station, the kind that runs local headlines at the top of every hour. At 10 o'clock, the anchor read a brief item about a federal fraud arrest in the Myers Park area. 4 counts. The name was Jason Mercer. Ray reached over and turned the radio off. We didn't say anything for a moment. I stood at the stern of the boat with a rod I hadn't cast yet and looked out at the flat gray water and waited to feel something definitive: relief or satisfaction, or the clean, bright sensation of justice that people describe in movies. What I felt was tired. Deeply, bone-level tired, the kind that has nothing to do with sleep. "You want to feel good about this?" Ray asked. He was watching me from the bow, his own rod across his knees, his face careful. "I want to feel nothing," I said. "And I can't." Ray nodded slowly, like that was exactly the answer he'd expected. "What do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Like something broke a long time ago," I said, "and today is just when I found all the pieces." Ray was quiet for a while. A gull came low over the water, 50 yards out, banked and rose again without landing. "He's going to have a long time to think about it," Ray said. "I know." I finally cast the line, watched it settle. "That's not what I'm thinking about." "Olivia." "Olivia," I said. Sandra called at 11:15. She was brisk and professional the way she always was, but there was a steadiness in her voice that hadn't been there in our earlier conversations, the sound of a person who had finished something difficult and done it well. "4 counts filed this morning," she said. "Wire fraud, identity fraud, bank fraud, and forgery, all federal. Jason Mercer was taken into custody at the Merriweather Drive property at approximately 10:05. A pause. Dr. Finch's independent evaluation was formally submitted as counter-evidence to the conservatorship petition this morning as well. The petition is effectively dead." Another pause shorter. "Pete Dunning completed his cooperation agreement in full. His attorney was very helpful. Derek Sims, the man Jason hired to impersonate you, was taken into custody the same morning," she added. "He's cooperating as well." "Thank you, Sandra," I said, "for all of it. Mr. Hayes." Her voice shifted slightly, still professional, but warmer at the edges. "I've been doing this for 20 years. Most of the time, the people who do what Jason Mercer did are counting on the fact that the person they're doing it to won't fight back." A brief pause. It was a pleasure to work a case where that assumption turned out to be wrong. After she hung up, I set the phone on the seat and picked up my rod and sat with the gray sky above me and the dark water below, and thought about the last 3 weeks of my life. I thought about Margaret. I thought about that Tuesday night in 2013 when we'd signed the LLC papers at the kitchen table, and how I'd thought she was being overcautious, and how she'd looked at me with that patient expression she reserved for moments when she knew something I hadn't figured out yet. She'd known. Not the specifics, maybe not Jason's name on a court document, not the nursing home in Concord, not Pete Dunning and his $12,000. But she'd known the shape of it. She'd felt it coming the way you feel weather coming, the way you know, before the sky changes, that something is moving toward you from a long way off. And she'd spent her last months building walls. My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my wrist against them and looked out at the water until the burning passed. "Ray," I said. He looked over. "Thank you for all of it. The fishing and the gas station sandwiches and sitting in that motel room at 5 in the morning when I didn't know what to do next." Ray made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You always knew what to do next," he said. "You just needed somewhere to put the other stuff while you were doing it." I thought about that for a moment. That's a generous way to look at it. "I'm a generous man," Ray said. He cast his line. "Always have been." The afternoon came in slowly. Clouds thickened to the west. Somewhere across the water, a loon called once and went quiet. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize, local area code. "Mr. Hayes." "It's Olivia. David Coleman said I should reach out directly." I know you don't have any reason to pick up if I call. I'm going to call anyway. I just wanted you to know first. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face up on the seat and looked at it for a long time. It rang 40 seconds later. I picked it up. Margaret had torn the picture out of a magazine sometime in the late 90s, one of those shelter magazines she used to stack on the nightstand and read on Sunday mornings while I made coffee. The picture showed a small wood frame house on a lake, a covered porch with 2 chairs facing the water, a dock extending out maybe 30 feet into the shallows. She'd taped it to the inside cover of a recipe book she kept in the kitchen. I'd seen it 1,000 times without really looking at it. I found that recipe book in one of the boxes I'd carried off the Merriweather porch at 4:30 in the morning. It was the first thing I unpacked when I moved into the lake house. The house on Lake Norman was not the house in the picture. It was smaller, the porch, narrower, the dock needed 2 new boards. The kitchen window stuck unless you lifted it at a slight angle while you pushed. But on the first morning, I woke up there in early August and stepped outside with my coffee and heard nothing except water and a pair of Canada geese working their way slowly along the far bank. I understood what Margaret had meant when she'd pointed to that picture and said, "Somewhere quiet enough to hear yourself think, Martin. That's all I want." I'd put her rocking chair on the porch the day I moved in. It sat to the right of the door, facing the water exactly where it belonged. The house was 22 minutes from David Coleman's office and 11 minutes from the grocery store on Highway 73. I bought what I needed, cooked simple things, read in the evenings. I used the Margaret Legacy Reserve for living expenses, carefully, modestly, the way Margaret would have wanted, and directed the fund's income toward the support program. David and I had been quietly building since July a legal assistance and financial counseling service for elderly residents in the Charlotte area who had experienced financial exploitation by family members. We'd already taken on 4 cases by August. Sandra Okafor had referred 2 of them. Ray came on a Saturday in the 3rd week of August with a cooler full of largemouth bass he'd caught that morning on Lake Wiley, and the absolute conviction that I needed to eat something he'd caught himself. "You look better," he said, setting the cooler on the porch steps and studying me with the frank assessment of a man who'd been watching me for 20 years. "I feel better," I said, and meant it. We cleaned the fish on the dock and fried them in the kitchen with cornmeal and a cast-iron skillet Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary. Ray found the hot sauce in the cabinet without being told where it was, which meant he'd been in this kitchen before I'd officially admitted to myself that I'd invited him over more than once. We ate on the porch. The lake was flat and gold in the late afternoon light, a motorboat crossing far and leaving a slow white wake that took a long time to reach the shore. "Sandra called yesterday," I said. Ray looked up from his plate. "Good news. Progress news," I said. "The federal case is moving forward. Jason's attorney is already talking about a plea arrangement. She thinks it'll resolve before it goes to trial." I broke a piece of cornbread. "She also told me the NC Medical Board opened a formal investigation into Dr. Watts." Ray nodded. "Good. And Pete Dunning is a few weeks into his probation. No incidents so far." I paused. "She said Eddie reached out to her office last week. He wanted to know if there was anything else he could do, any way to be useful." Ray considered that. "You believe him?" "I think he's genuinely ashamed," I said. "I think that counts for something." Ray ate without responding for a moment. "Then you think about calling her?" He didn't need to say the name. He never needed to say the name. "I talked to her," I said. Ray's fork stopped. He looked at me. "Since when?" "Since the day Jason was arrested." I looked out at the water. She called from her car parked outside the house. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her for the first minute. My chest tightened at the memory, that sound. Olivia's voice coming apart on the other end of the line. The specific texture of a person discovering they've been used by someone they trusted. We talked for a long time. About her mother. About what she'd found in the house. About what she'd let happen. I paused. She didn't make excuses. That was the thing that... I stopped. Pressed my lips together. She didn't make a single excuse. What did you say to her? I told her that understanding what you did wrong is the beginning, not the end. I set my fork down. And that the way forward is built out of what you do next, not what you say. Ray looked at me for a moment. She coming to see you? She asked if she could, I said. I told her I'd let her know when I was ready. And I looked at Margaret's rocking chair beside the door. The wood had weathered a little in the August sun, but it was solid. It had always been solid. I think I'm getting close, I said. Ray finished his food. He carried his plate to the kitchen and washed it himself, which he always did, and which I'd stopped arguing with years ago. When he came back out, he stood at the porch railing and looked out at the lake for a minute. Margaret would have liked it here, he said. My throat tightened. She picked it, I said. In a way. Ray glanced at me sideways. The magazine picture. The magazine picture. He nodded once like that settled something. Then he picked up his cooler, said he'd see me Wednesday, and walked to his truck. I listened to the engine fade down the gravel road. The lake was very still. The Canada geese were gone. The last of the afternoon light was going orange above the tree line to the west. My phone was on the table beside the rocking chair. I picked it up, found Olivia's number, typed 3 words. Come Saturday morning. I sent her the address right after. She didn't ask how far it was or what time worked best. She just said, okay. I set the phone down and looked out at the water and waited to feel afraid. I didn't. She arrived at 8:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock on the kitchen wall when I heard the car on the gravel road, and I looked at it the way you look at something when you're trying to anchor yourself to something concrete and ordinary. 8:47, early September. The lake was still in the morning, a thin ground fog sitting just above the water's surface the way it does when the nights start cooling, but the days haven't gotten the message yet. I looked out the kitchen window. Olivia was standing at the gate. She hadn't opened it. She was wearing a dark jacket, her hair pulled back, her hands at her sides, no bag, no phone in her hand, nothing to hold on to. She was just standing there looking at the house the way a person looks at something. They're not sure they have the right to approach. I watched her for 11 minutes. I'm not proud of that. But I needed those 11 minutes the same way I'd needed the 12 flights of stairs the Sunday I went to David's office. I needed the time to get myself sorted before the conversation started to make sure that when I opened that gate, I was the person I wanted to be, and not just the person I'd been on the worst morning of this whole long summer. At 8:58, I walked out the front door and down the porch steps and across the small yard to the gate. Olivia looked up when she heard my footsteps on the gravel. Her eyes were red at the edges. She'd been crying in the car, I thought, or hadn't slept, or both. She looked like she had aged in a way that had nothing to do with time and everything to do with what she'd been carrying since June. I opened the gate. I didn't hug her. Not yet. I stepped back and nodded toward the porch, and she followed me up the steps, and we sat in the 2 chairs that faced the water, her in the plain wooden chair I'd bought at a yard sale in July, me beside Margaret's rocker. For a moment, neither of us spoke, but it wasn't the empty kind of not speaking. It was the kind that happens when two people have so much to say that they're each waiting for the right place to start, like standing at the edge of something large and looking for the first foothold. Olivia found it first. "I'm not here for the house," she said. Her voice was steady, rougher than I remembered, like it had been through something and come out changed. "I'm not here for money or for you to tell me everything is fine. I know everything is not fine." She pressed her hands flat on her knees. "I'm here because I need you to know that I understand what I did. Not just what happened to you, what I did. The difference matters to me." I looked at her. She held my gaze without flinching, which told me she'd prepared for this the same way she used to prepare for difficult things when she was a child, by deciding ahead of time that she wasn't going to look away. "Tell me," I said. She did. She talked for a long time, and she did it the way she'd done it in David's office, without excuses, without the softening language people use when they're trying to make something sound smaller than it is. She told me about the incremental way Jason had worked on her, and how she'd let him, and how at some point she'd stopped asking herself whether what they were doing was right, and started asking herself only whether it would work. She told me about the Sunday morning, about standing behind Jason in the doorway, about not being able to look at me. "I've thought about that moment every day since," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard and looked out at the water until she had it back. "You looked at me and I looked away. My own father. That's—" She stopped, shook her head. "There's no version of that I can make okay." "No," I said. "There isn't." She nodded. She'd expected that. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here to be accountable. And there was something in that, something in the way she sat with the truth of what I'd said, instead of recoiling from it, that told me she was already becoming someone different from the person who'd stood in that doorway. "The NPA," I said. "You're cooperating fully." "Everything," she said. "David's office, Sandra, the federal investigators. Whatever they need." She paused. "I'm repaying the money. It's going to take time, but I've already started. I got a job 3 weeks ago, accounting firm in Ballantine. Nothing like what I had before, but it's mine." A small, careful thing crossed her face, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. "I pay my own rent now, my own utilities, my own groceries." She looked at me. "It sounds like nothing." "It doesn't sound like nothing," I said. We sat for a while. A great blue heron came in low over the water and landed at the dock's edge with the unhurried elegance of a creature that had never doubted its place in the world. I stood up, went inside, came back out with the wooden box. Olivia's breath caught when she saw it. I sat down and placed it on the small table between us. "She wrote one for you," I said. "I want you to have it, the whole box." I paused. "There's also a sealed envelope in there addressed to David Coleman. He's already opened it. It was part of the legal preparation, but the rest is yours." Olivia reached out and put both hands on the box, the way you hold something you're afraid to drop. Her eyes filled, and this time she didn't fight it. The tears came quietly, tracking down her face without any sound, and she let them. "Did you read mine?" she asked. "No," I said. "It had your name on it." She lifted her eyes to mine. "Thank you," she said, "for that. For—" She stopped, looked at the box in her hands. "For opening the gate." I didn't answer right away. The heron was still at the dock's edge, motionless, watching the water with absolute patience. "There's something your mother wrote in one of her letters," I said. "To me, not to you. She wrote it about 6 months before she passed." I paused. "She said the bravest thing Martin has ever done isn't anything he built. It's that he keeps showing up." every single day, for everyone who needs him, even when nobody notices and nobody says thank you. I looked at Olivia. I want you to show up, Olivia. That's all. Not for me, for yourself. I want you to become the person your mother already believed you were. Olivia pressed the box against her chest. Her shoulders shook once hard, and then she pulled in a breath and held it until the shaking stopped. After a while, she stood up to go. She stopped at the porch steps and turned. She'd noticed Margaret's rocking chair. I could tell by the way her eyes stopped moving when they reached it, by the small, involuntary sound she made in the back of her throat. "You kept it," she said. "Of course I did," I said. She looked at the chair for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Then she walked down the steps and across the yard and out through the gate, which she latched carefully behind her, and I watched her get into her car and sit there for a moment before she started the engine. I stayed on the porch until her taillights disappeared down the gravel road. Then I sat back down in my chair next to Margaret's and looked out at the lake, and for the first time since the morning of June, the quiet felt like something I had chosen rather than something that had been left behind. Jason Mercer entered a guilty plea on a Tuesday morning in February. I know because David called me while I was painting the fence along the north side of the yard, a project I'd started in January, when the weather had a few mild days in a row, and I'd decided the fence needed 2 coats, and my hands needed something to do. I had a brush in one hand, and my phone pressed against my ear with my shoulder, and when David said the words, "guilty plea, all 4 counts," I kept painting. Slow, even strokes, the white paint going over the old gray wood. "The sentencing is scheduled for mid-March," David said. "All right," I said. "You don't want to be there." "No," I said. "I don't need to be there." David was quiet for a moment. "The U.S. Attorney's Office asked if you wanted to submit a victim impact statement." I thought about that. The brush moved along the fence rail, slow and steady. "I'll think about it," I said. I did think about it. I spent 3 days thinking about it, and in the end I wrote 1-2 pages, handwritten the same way Margaret used to write everything that mattered. I didn't write about anger. I didn't write about what Jason had taken or what he'd tried to take. I wrote about what it felt like to drive away from a house you'd spent 30 years building with your dead wife's rocking chair in the trunk of a cab and not know if the person you loved most in the world was going to find her way back to herself. I mailed it to David's office and didn't think about it again. The sentencing was on a Wednesday in 7 years federal. David called me from the courthouse steps while I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching a pair of wood ducks work their way along the edge of the dock. 7 years, he said. "Okay," I said. "That's all you've got." "That's all I've got," I said. "Is it done?" "It's done." I thanked him and hung up and watched the wood ducks for a while. They were methodical about it, moving slowly, systematically, checking every inch of the dock's edge for whatever it was they were looking for. I appreciated the commitment. The closing came 2 weeks later. David handled the sale of the Merriweather property through Hayes Property LLC, which still owned it, had always owned it, and which now transferred the proceeds in exactly the way Margaret's protocol had specified. One portion went into the Margaret Legacy Reserve. The larger portion went to the Elderly Financial Protection Program, which by March had taken on 11 cases and was in conversations with the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office about a formal referral partnership. Sandra Okafor had agreed to serve on the advisory board. She'd called it in her precise and understated way, a logical extension of the work. I drove past the Merriweather house once about a week after the sale closed. I didn't stop. I drove past slowly, the way you drive past a place that used to mean something, and I looked at the front porch where my suitcases had been stacked on a Sunday morning 9 months earlier, And I felt not much, actually. The particular numbness that settles over a place in your memory once it's been converted from present to past. The new owners had already planted window boxes, pink geraniums. Margaret would have approved. Ray came for dinner on a Friday evening in late March, the week after the sentencing. He brought a bottle of bourbon Woodford Reserve, the good kind, and 2 glasses, and we sat on the porch until well after dark. "How do you feel?" he asked somewhere around the second glass. I thought about it, the way I'd learned to think about questions that mattered slowly without rushing toward an answer just to fill the space. "Like I closed a door I should have closed a long time ago," I said. "And like there's a room on the other side of it I haven't explored yet." Ray turned his glass slowly in his hands. "Margaret would be proud of you." My throat tightened the way it always did when someone said her name in the present tense, would be as though she were somewhere nearby and simply hadn't heard yet. "She'd say I took too long to figure it out," I said. Ray smiled. "She'd be right. She usually was." He raised his glass. I raised mine. We didn't make a toast out loud, we didn't need to. Some things between people who have known each other long enough don't require words. I told him about Olivia. That she'd been to the lake house twice more since September. That we talked on the phone on Sunday evenings, the way Margaret and I used to talk on Sunday evenings when Olivia was small, and we'd put her to bed and had an hour to ourselves. That she'd paid her first installment of the financial restitution in January. A check she'd written herself from her own account, that she'd mailed rather than handed to me, because she said she needed the act of mailing it to feel real. "She's going to be all right," Ray said. "Yes," I said. "She is." He left around 10. I washed the glasses and put the bourbon away and stood at the kitchen sink for a moment, looking out the window at the dark lake. Somewhere out there, the wood ducks were sleeping on the waterheads, tucked, riding whatever current moved beneath the surface in the dark. I thought about the morning I'd driven away from Merriweather Drive in a cab, Margaret's chair in the trunk, David Coleman's voice on the phone, telling me to get some rest. I thought about the motel room, the mustard carpet, the $200 bank balance. I thought about Ray showing up in 17 minutes with coffee and a fishing rod. I thought about Margaret sitting in David's office 4 years ago, building walls I didn't know I needed. I turned off the kitchen light and walked out to the porch and sat in my chair next to hers in the dark. "You thought of everything I told her. You always thought of everything." The lake was quiet. The tree line was a dark shape against a darker sky. Somewhere down the shore a bullfrog started up, and then another, and then the whole night was full of them, loud and purposeful and completely indifferent to everything except the fact that they were alive, and it was spring. I stayed out there for a long time. October came to Lake Norman the way it always comes to the Carolina Piedmont, quietly, without announcement. The maple along the eastern bank going amber overnight, and the mornings turning cool enough that you needed a jacket on the porch before the sun cleared the tree line. Olivia had started coming on Sunday afternoons, sometime in late summer. It had begun without either of us formally deciding anything. She'd called one Saturday to ask if she could stop by, and I'd said yes, and then she'd come the following Sunday too, and the Sunday after that. By October, it had become something we simply did, the way families accumulate rituals without noticing a phone call here, a standing appointment there. Until one day you realize the structure has built itself around you while you were paying attention to other things. She was in the yard when I came out with the tea, pulling weeds from along the base of the fence, a project nobody had asked her to take on, that she'd apparently decided needed doing and had simply started. She was wearing old jeans and gardening gloves and had a smear of dirt across one cheekbone that she hadn't noticed. I set the mugs on the small table between the chairs and watched her work for a moment. She had Margaret's hands, I hadn't let myself notice that in a long time. "Tea's out," I said. She pulled off her gloves and came up the steps, washing her hands at the outdoor spigot before she sat down. She wrapped both hands around the mug, the same way she had in David Coleman's office 16 months ago, but this time there was no trembling, just the ordinary comfort of something warm on a cool October afternoon. We talked about small things. A book she was reading, something about a family in coastal Maine, she said. It was slow, but she couldn't put it down. A woodpecker that had been working on the dead pine at the water's edge every morning for a week. Her apartment, which she'd repainted in September. Blue-gray, she said. Her mother's color. At some point, she looked out at the water and asked the question I'd been expecting since summer. "Did you know it would end up like this?" I looked at the lake. The maples on the far bank were full gold, now the reflection of them moving slowly on the surface of the water. "No," I said. "I didn't know anything the morning I drove away from that house. I just knew I had to keep moving." I paused. "Your mother knew. She had a much better sense of these things than I did." Olivia smiled, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. She had a better sense of most things than most people. "She did," I said. We sat for a while with that. The woodpecker started up somewhere behind the house, and Olivia turned toward the sound, with the instinctive attention of someone who'd been learning to notice things again. "I read her letter again last week," she said. "The one from the box." She paused. "I've read it a lot, actually. Different parts land differently, depending on the day." "That's how she wrote," I said. "She wrote for the person you'd be later, not just the person you were when you opened it." Olivia's eyes filled briefly, and she pressed her lips together and looked back out at the water, not the broken kind of crying from 16 months ago, just the quiet kind that comes when something true arrives at exactly the right moment. "She wrote that you sold the Corvette," Olivia said. "I keep thinking about that. The burgundy one. You worked on it for 3 years." "I did." "And you never told me." "You were 17, I said. You had enough to think about." She shook her head slowly. "I want to be someone who notices," she said. "I've been thinking about that a lot this year. I spent a long time not noticing things on purpose because it was easier. I don't want to live like that anymore." I looked at her, my daughter, sitting in the October light, with mud on her cheekbone, and tea going cold in her hands, saying the truest thing I'd heard in a long time. "Good," I said. "Then don't." The afternoon went the way good afternoons go, slowly, without urgency, the light changing by degrees on the water, until the far bank went from gold to copper to the deep red of early evening. When Olivia stood to leave, she stopped at Margaret's rocking chair, the way she always did now. She put her hand on the back of it briefly, the way you touch something you want to remember the texture of. She would have liked it here, she said. It had become something close to a ritual between us. She said it. I answered the same way, and the repetition of it was the point. "She picked it," I said. "In a way." Olivia nodded. She went down the steps and across the yard and latched the gate behind her. She waved once from the car window before she pulled onto the gravel road and disappeared into the trees. I sat back down in my chair. The lake had gone still and silver in the early evening, the reflection of the sky on the water, almost indistinguishable from the sky itself. I thought about a lot of things sitting there. I thought about a Sunday morning in June and a text message at 4:30 and a cab pulling up to a house full of lights. I thought about a motel room and a yellow legal pad and a small black recorder on a desk in the morning sun. I thought about a wooden box and a rocking chair and 35 years of someone loving you in ways you didn't always know to look for. The mansion was never the inheritance. What Margaret left behind for both of us was something no deed could hold, and no court could challenge, and no one could forge. We were still learning how to carry it, but we were learning. And out on the water in the last of the October light, that was enough. People ask what I learned from all of this. Here it is. Love without boundaries isn't generosity. It's a slow invitation to be taken for granted. I carried everything quietly for 30 years, and my daughter forgot there was anything being carried. That was partly my fault. Don't do what I did. Don't let your silence become someone else's permission. Have the honest conversation before someone changes your locks. Family stories, revenge, doesn't look like the movies. Real justice is quiet. It arrives one unpaid bill, one court record, one truth at a time. I'm not a bitter man. I believe God doesn't waste pain, He uses it. What Jason built to destroy me, Margaret had already turned into protection. That's not luck. That's grace. My honest opinion. The most dangerous gift you can give someone is comfort they never earned. Family drama revenge doesn't begin with a villain, it begins with a parent who loved too silently and a child who stopped noticing. Family stories revenge ends not with shouting, but with a quiet lake, a rocking chair, and the people who find their way back. Family drama revenge is real. So is redemption. So is grace. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Family stories revenge. Sometimes it ends on a porch in October with tea and forgiveness. And that is enough. Thank you for watching until the very end. Upcoming stories contain fictional elements crafted for life lessons and reflection. If that's not your thing, no hard feelings, choose what serves you. But if you're staying, I'll see you in the next one.